not to?
So it's official. The SA Health Products Regulatory Authority says there is no evidence the anti-parasitic drug Ivermectin is useful in treating COVID-19. There are people, including doctors, who believe fervently that it did make a difference. So much so, the regulator gave some leeway to doctors who wanted to prescribe it for COVID-19 patients. Let's speak now to Dr. Boitumelo Semete-Makokotlela, CEO of SAHPRA. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. So this week, SAHPRA announcing on Ivermectin. Does this mean that your controlled compassionate use access program for Ivermectin is coming to an end?
Yes, it means that effective as, yesterday when we issued the statement, the program has indeed come to an end for availing Ivermectin for the management of COVID-19.
What new research has come to light to make you more sure than ever that it does not work for COVID treatment?
Sure. So, when we put in place this controlled access program, at the point we had what we call a clinical equipoise, wherein we didn't have sufficient data that says this drug has the demonstrable clinical efficacy for the management of disease, and nor does it have data that indicates that it's not safe. And so hence we put in place this program. We have been monitoring the data that has been generated across the world. There's been a number of clinical trials in Malaysia, in Israel, in the UK that we have been following up. And basically all of these studies demonstrate that when this drug is compared to the standard of care, it does not demonstrate that clinical efficacy that one would expect in a clinical trial at this point.
And yet, so many people, not, anecdotally, of course, but a lot of people swear by it. They say it helped their COVID-19. We also know, and we've spoken to doctors on this program who also believe it works. So the only option I can think for this abiding belief is that there was a coincidence of improvement of a person's symptoms when they were taking Ivermectin, or is there a possibility that these studies, comprehensive as they have been, have not perhaps seen an unusual link that might have made a difference? What do you think? What do you think the explanation is for this strongly held belief that it makes a difference?
Yeah, certainly, and that's why we constantly said that we will look at any data, because for us as a regulator, we cannot go on anecdotal data. We have to go with data that is generated from properly designed studies as per international guidelines. And you may have seen that those studies, that a number of those who were really supporting this drug, a lot of their studies have been retracted subsequently because of unethical reporting, because of meddling with the data, etc. So when one looks at the scientific evidence, we do not see this clinical benefit. Yet when you talk to people, you do hear these stories. And so it becomes difficult because unless this is studied properly, one cannot then associate this purported clinical benefit to anything that is scientific at this point. And where we stand, we're not seeing that from properly designed studies.
Yeah. And we have to look at the science, and as you say, some people still believe it, despite the science saying otherwise. I want to talk to you a little bit more about where we are in terms of COVID antiviral medications. Do we have antiviral treatments available in South Africa for COVID?
Sure, certainly. So, and again, when we put this program in place, it was at the time where we had very limited options as a country in terms of COVID therapies. And hence we said, because of this clinical equipoise, let's make it available under a very controlled mechanism. Since then, we've had a number of drugs that have been authorized, even though it's under emergency authorization. We have drugs such as molnupiravir that we have recently authorized for the management of the disease, even though it's still quite, it's in the early phases of disease, the first 5 days or so. We have remdesivir, which we had authorized for use, and there's a number of others, but those were the ones that I can just highlight for now.
All right, a quick question about self-test COVID kits. I know they're widely available in other countries, but I've not been able to find them on the shelves in South African pharmacies. Why not?
Sure, thank you. So we have recently, I think in the last months or so, we've published the requirements as a regulator to say for a product to be authorized by the regulator, these are the technical requirements that it should comply with. And we've received a number of applications and we're busy evaluating those. And the important thing with these tests is that we need to ensure that they give us the required specificity and sensitivity so that, you don't sit with the number of false positives or false negatives. But as I say, we've got a few in the system now that we're evaluating, and we expect to make authorizations for a number of those in the coming weeks or so.
One last question on ivermectin. If someone still believes fervently, despite the medical evidence, that it doesn't actually work for COVID-19, can they get it legally?
So there is a mechanism within which they can, and this mechanism requires that, the doctor applies the required due diligence, and that the onus and the responsibility of the patient, safety is purely to the doctor, because what we have is we have a topical formulation of ivermectin that has been authorized. Now, what that means is that because the active substance, being the ivermectin, has been authorized for human use, it means that there are pharmacies who do what we call compounding, so they can make the product available on a prescription basis for a specific individual for a specified time frame. And this will be on a prescription by a healthcare practitioner. So that mechanism exists. But doctors then would take the full responsibility and accountability for that individual. Why? Because this is not a registered drug.
It's not registered for treating COVID.
Exactly.
Could it be dangerous if you give it to someone for COVID?
From the reports that we have seen, there are instances where we've seen reports of liver damage caused by this drug at the quantities that were given. So hence, again, the dosing becomes quite important. And this is one of the elements that, when you conduct a clinical trial, you do analyze to say what dose should I be given this drug at? And that hasn't been done. So hence, we say the doctors must really be cautious in instances that they choose to prescribe this, because then the safety is quite critical. So the liver damage, we've seen reports of that. And so we would just say the public must be aware of that. And that's really the one that has stood out so far. We have looked at other studies and nothing too much of concern at this point. The only issue, we're not seeing that clinical efficacy, which is critical for any drug that one consumes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boitumelo Semete-Makokotlela, CEO of SAHPRA, that's the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority.